They say truth is bitter. But what happens when a philosopher turns that bitterness into a full-blown worldview? Arthur Schopenhauer didn't just question love, he dismantled it. To him, romance was a lie, a mask worn by biology. And women, he believed they were nature's way of continuing life by seducing men into sacrifice. It's not flattering, it's not politically correct, but it is one of the most unsettling ideas in philosophy. This video isn't about blame. It's about understanding how one man's deep loneliness and brutal honesty led him to see love, not as salvation, but as strategy. So, are men and women truly wired differently? Or was Schopenhauer projecting his own suffering onto the rest of us? Let's find out. Part 1. The pessimist behind the philosophy. To understand why Schopenhauer held such controversial views about women, we have to first understand the man himself and the world that shaped him. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't your typical philosopher. While others searched for meaning, he insisted there wasn't one. Where others found beauty, he found delusion. And while most people chased happiness, he saw that chase itself as the root of suffering. He was born into a wealthy family in late 18th century Germany, just as Europe was brimming with dreams of progress, freedom, and reason. But from a young age, Schopenhauer stood apart. He didn't trust optimism. He didn't believe life was some grand adventure. Instead, he developed a philosophy built on one core idea, that behind everything we do, every goal, every desire, every relationship, there's a force he called the will, a blind unconscious drive to survive, reproduce, and keep life moving, no matter the cost. He believed that love was just a trick of nature, that attraction wasn't romantic, it was biological. We think we're choosing our partners, but according to him, nature is choosing for us. And this wasn't just theory, Schopenhauer lived it. He never married. He avoided attachments. He often kept to himself and was known to be fiercely independent, even hostile to those around him. He also had a difficult relationship with his mother, a successful writer who valued social life and emotional expression. Their worldviews clashed. She valued feeling, he valued reason. Eventually, they drifted apart completely. Over time, Schopenhauer's isolation didn't just shape his ideas, it sharpened them. He began to view society through a cold lens. Human relationships, emotions, and even love became, to him, tools of nature. And nowhere was this more evident than in his views on women. He didn't see women as society saw them, not as companions, muses, or equals in the romantic ideal. He saw them as nature's chosen instruments for preserving life. And that made his conclusions controversial even in his own time. But before we judge him, we must ask, was he revealing something hidden and uncomfortable about human nature? Or was he simply a man projecting his pain onto the world around him? In the next part, we'll dive into what exactly Schopenhauer believed separated men from women, and why he thought those differences ran deeper than society was willing to admit. Part 2. Women as emotion, men as reason. Schopenhauer believed that men and women are not just physically different, but mentally and emotionally distinct at the core. He saw men as guided by abstract thinking, long-term vision, and ambition. They chase ideals, build systems, and try to leave a mark on the world. Women, in his view, are anchored in emotional intelligence, more in tune with relationships, survival, and the present moment. He saw this as nature's way of balancing the species. If men build the ship, women make sure it doesn't sink. Take, for example, how each responds to conflict. A man might intellectualize the problem, try to find a logical fix, or suppress his emotions altogether. He's thinking ahead, already focused on the consequences or the strategy. A woman, on the other hand, might read tone, body language, and unspoken emotion within seconds. She might respond not just to what was said, but how it was said. She's scanning the emotional weather, not just the facts. In relationships, this contrast shows up all the time. Many men struggle to express how they feel, but they can spend hours planning the future, analyzing options, or explaining theories. Meanwhile, a woman might notice subtle changes in energy, pick up on unspoken tension, or sense when something's off, even before the man is fully aware of it himself. To Schopenhauer, this emotional sensitivity wasn't something taught, it was instinctive. Women, in his words, were nature's guardians of life. And to guard life, you have to be perceptive, adaptable, and rooted in what's real, not lost in thought. But here's the irony. Schopenhauer respected logic more than emotion, so while he saw women as practical, grounded, and emotionally aware, he didn't fully value those traits. He believed deep philosophy required detachment, a kind of mental distance he thought women were not designed for. And yet, ask yourself this: who handles a household crisis better, a thinker or a feeler? Who's more likely to prevent a child from getting hurt, sense danger before it strikes, or bring people together during conflict? The truth is, both forms of intelligence are powerful, but Schopenhauer couldn't see emotional wisdom as equal. To him, it was secondary, a tool of survival, not of truth. Still, whether or not we agree with him, his view points to a deeper question. Are our minds shaped more by nature or by nurture? Was he describing a timeless truth, or a reflection of a society that never gave emotional intelligence the respect it deserved? But Schopenhauer didn't just describe women as emotionally attuned. He went one step further, a step that would stir debates for centuries. He claimed their nature wasn't just emotional, it was childlike. Let's unpack what he meant by that, and why it says more about his view of reality than it does about women themselves. Part 3. The childlike nature of women. At first glance, it sounds dismissive, even insulting, but in Schopenhauer's philosophy, childlike didn't just mean immature. It meant present-focused, emotionally expressive, and driven by immediate needs rather than abstract ideas. He believed that, like children, women are more responsive to what's happening now, not obsessed with the distant future, not entangled in grand ideologies, but grounded in the current moment where survival and emotional harmony actually happen. In a strange way, he saw this as an advantage. He thought women were more adaptable, better suited to raising children, and more in touch with life's real demands. Let's pause here. Today, we understand that emotional sensitivity, intuition, and present moment awareness are not childish traits, they're human ones. In fact, they're crucial in fields like caregiving, counseling, crisis management, and parenting. But Schopenhauer, true to his dark worldview, couldn't see it that way. To him, the ability to dream, to detach, to reason abstractly, that was mature. The ability to feel deeply, nurture others, or adapt emotionally, that was instinctual, animalistic, childlike. So when he looked at women, he saw people nature had wired not for philosophy or ambition, but for preservation. And to him, that made them fundamentally different from men. Let's take an example. A man might spend years chasing a dream, risking time, money, and comfort for an abstract reward. Meanwhile, a woman, especially in Schopenhauer's time, might prioritize stability, relationships, or family. She might choose what works over what inspires. Schopenhauer took that as proof. Men live in the world of ideals, women in the world of reality. But here's where his thinking becomes questionable. He saw logic as superior to emotion. He treated the visionary as more valuable than the nurturer. And in doing so, he overlooked the quiet strength that comes from living with feeling, adaptability, and emotional presence. Even more so, he ignored the cultural limitations women faced. In his time, women weren't even allowed into most universities. They weren't given the opportunity to pursue abstract thought or develop independent careers. So the childlike behavior he observed might not have been nature, it might have been nurture, shaped by centuries of social conditioning. This is where his philosophy begins to crack. Because if you deny half the population access to knowledge, freedom, and agency, can you really say they're less capable? Or are you just seeing the consequences of a system you refuse to question? Schopenhauer may have believed he was describing human nature, but maybe, just maybe, he was only describing his own time and his own bias. But for Schopenhauer, even this emotional realism wasn't the full picture. Beneath all behavior, he believed there was one force pulling the strings: reproduction. In his mind, women weren't just emotional beings, they were nature's chosen instruments for continuing the species. And that belief would lead to one of his most unsettling conclusions. Part 4. Nature's tool for reproduction. He believed that what we call love is not a miracle, but a mechanism. According to him, romantic attraction isn't driven by soulmates or divine destiny. It's nature's trick, a biological illusion designed to get us to reproduce no matter the cost. He called it the will to life, an unconscious force inside every living being, pushing it to survive, to multiply, to continue the species. And in Schopenhauer's view, women were nature's primary agents in this game, not because they chose to be, but because nature had selected them to be the carriers of life, the gatekeepers of reproduction. To him, everything, from a woman's beauty to her voice to her behavior, was part of an invisible strategy created by nature. She wasn't acting, she was the performance. Harsh? Yes. But this wasn't moral judgment, it was biological reductionism. In Schopenhauer's world, the man may believe he's chasing love, passion, or deep connection, but in reality, he's just being pulled toward reproduction like a puppet on strings. He's not in love with the person, he's in love with what nature wants him to love: youth, fertility, and health, all signs that scream, this is a good chance to pass on your genes. And women, he believed they instinctively seek protection, resources, and strength, not because they're materialistic, but because their biology is wired for one thing: survival of the child. From this lens, marriage isn't a sacred union, it's a long-term reproductive contract. Romance isn't poetry, it's programming. And the tragedy, according to Schopenhauer, is that most people never realize it. We suffer heartbreak, we write songs, we cry for lost love. But all along, it was never really about us. It was about life itself, using us as tools for its continuation. This is where Schopenhauer takes a deeply unsettling turn. He believed that the illusion of love was necessary, because if people saw it for what it really was, they wouldn't play the game. No one would willingly sacrifice their freedom, their peace, or their dreams just to be part of this endless cycle. So nature had to blind us, to give us hope, to make us believe that love was the ultimate human experience, when in fact, it was just biology in disguise. Now let's be clear, this is one man's view. Many thinkers across history have challenged this idea, arguing that love can be selfless, transcendent, even spiritual. But Schopenhauer wasn't interested in comfort, he was obsessed with truth, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. And his truth was this: we are not free, we are driven, we don't fall in love, we fall into nature's trap. And the ones who understand this, they begin to see relationships, attraction, and even their own desires through a very different lens. And for Schopenhauer, nowhere was that trap more dangerous than in the institution we call marriage. Because in his eyes, marriage wasn't a symbol of love. It was a deal, a lifelong contract where one side gives everything and the other collects the reward. Part 5. The Marriage Contract and the Male Dilemma. For Schopenhauer, marriage wasn't sacred, it wasn't romantic. It was strategic, and not in a good way. He saw it as a lifelong agreement engineered not by love, but by nature. An agreement where one party, usually the man, pays the emotional and financial cost, while nature fulfills its goal of reproduction. In his writings, Schopenhauer warned men against marriage in the most direct terms. He believed that once a man enters that contract, his freedom is gone. His ambitions, his time, even his purpose slowly start revolving around maintaining the family structure. Not because he wants to, but because he has to. Now, you might think this sounds cynical, and it is, but in Schopenhauer's eyes, the system was tilted from the beginning. He believed that once a child is born, the woman's purpose, biologically speaking, is fulfilled. But the man's responsibility begins. He's expected to provide, protect, and support, often at the cost of his own dreams. To him, this wasn't partnership, it was obligation. This belief came from the same pessimistic lens through which he saw everything in life. The idea that what looks noble on the surface often hides deeper instincts underneath. So when he looked at marriage, he didn't see love and loyalty. He saw sacrifice, often one-sided. He believed women, guided by nature's instinct to secure safety and resources, would be drawn to men not for their minds or hearts, but for their stability. And once the commitment was locked in, the emotional dynamics would shift. He described this change bluntly, suggesting that affection could fade, intimacy could dry up, and yet the man would still be bound, expected to give, without receiving the same energy in return. But pause for a moment. This view, while dramatic, was shaped by Schopenhauer's personal experience, his solitude, his distrust of human nature, and his belief that suffering lies at the heart of all relationships. Not everyone shares this outlook. There are marriages built on real friendship, mutual growth, and shared purpose. There are women who love deeply, not strategically, and there are men who find in marriage not a trap, but a deeper meaning. But for Schopenhauer, meaning itself was suspect. To him, the world was a theatre where nature plays the lead, and humans are just following the script, believing we're in control when we're really not. So what does that mean for modern relationships? Are we freer now than people were in Schopenhauer's time? Or are we still living out ancient patterns in new packaging? One thing's clear, he didn't write these things to be agreeable. He wrote them to expose what he believed people were too afraid to admit. And just when you think he's done tearing apart romance, love, and marriage, he surprises you. Because buried within all this darkness is a strange kind of respect. Let's explore that in the next part. Part 6. What Schopenhauer secretly admired about women. For a man who wrote with such harshness, Schopenhauer left behind a surprising contradiction. Because buried in all his criticisms was a strange kind of admiration. While he dismissed women as emotionally driven and biologically programmed, He also admitted, almost reluctantly, that they possessed a kind of wisdom men often lack. Not the kind found in books or philosophy, but the kind shaped by survival, instinct, and experience. He acknowledged that women are better suited to the practical demands of life, that they're often more alert to risk, more skilled in managing relationships, and more emotionally tuned to their surroundings. In one of his essays, he even said that women are more sober in their judgment, not because they lack depth, but because they don't get lost in fantasy the way men do. They deal with what is, not what might be. To Schopenhauer, this wasn't philosophical genius, but it was nature's intelligence in action. He saw women as masters of reality. While men chased legacy, women managed life. While men dreamed of conquest, women ensured continuity. He pointed out that women are often the ones who hold families together, who intuitively care for the weak, and who build emotional bonds that keep societies functioning. But again, he didn't frame this as equality. To him, this was just balance, nature dividing roles for the sake of survival. Yet you can't help but wonder, if someone as skeptical as Schopenhauer could still recognize value in traits he didn't understand, then maybe, beneath all his cold logic, there was a trace of reverence he couldn't admit. Maybe he envied what he couldn't grasp. Maybe he feared what he couldn't control. Or maybe, like many thinkers before him, he was trapped between two worlds. One ruled by reason and the other ruled by emotion. But here's the real question. Was Schopenhauer beschrieb Frauen? Or was he exposing the parts of himself he never came to terms with? Because the philosopher who claimed love was an illusion, spent his life searching for truth, and never found someone to share it with. Let's bring everything together now and ask, was Schopenhauer right or just wounded? Conclusion, was he right or just wounded? Schopenhauer's views on women were never meant to be comfortable. They were sharp, confrontational, and to many, deeply offensive. But they weren't written for applause. They were written by a man who saw life not through the eyes of a lover, but through the lens of suffering. A man who believed that everything, from beauty to love to marriage, was just nature playing its game, using us to keep life going. And yet, beneath all his bitterness, there's something hauntingly human. A loneliness that seeps through the lines, a hunger for truth so raw it burns everything in its path, even hope, and maybe even connection. So, was Schopenhauer right? Are we just biological machines dancing to nature's tune? Are women and men truly wired so differently that love is just instinct pretending to be poetry? Or was Schopenhauer simply staring at his own reflection, seeing his disillusionment and mistaking it for truth? That's not a question this video can answer. And maybe that's the point. Philosophy doesn't hand us answers, it hands us mirrors. And what we see depends on how deeply we're willing to look.